This is gonna be weirder than usual. Can't be helped. It's like we live in a room, and there's a poster on the wall. We stare at it, and we think that's the whole world. The room and the poster. Like in that movie, what is it called?
It's the Shawshank Redemption. It's the Shawshank Redemption, you uncultured swine! It can be tricky to properly explain what makes Control good. And it must be good, right? Look at these scores by totally always correct professional games journalists. They never get these things wrong, right? Right? Before we answer that ironically posed question, spoiler warning for a lot of the most important stuff in the game, particularly the last several hours, which if you have not already played Control and have even a bit of intention to do so, trust me when I say, if you spoil anything of the last 3 hours of the game, you've ruined the game. So if you're interested in it, go play, come back, and we'll discuss. If you've already played Control, or you just will absolutely not be playing it at all, let's get into it. Picking on the scum of the gaming industry aside, Control is a good game. But, once again, explaining why can be complicated. Journalist scores and Game of the Year status aside, Control has a pretty notable number of missteps. The game is solid graphically speaking, but it never really does anything on a visual level that just blew my fucking mind. It isn't really cutting edge in terms of its graphical fidelity or art direction. Jessie, while looking plenty lifelike, certainly isn't going to make me do a double or triple take to make sure it isn't an actual real person in front of me, and her look isn't unique enough for me to have her design firmly affixed to my brain. The game's audio is good insofar as creating an atmosphere of emptiness that isn't quite right. The ambient thrum and pulsing of the oldest house has an air of something being just barely off. That unnerving feeling just under your skin that something is not as it should be, but you have no idea what that something is. That's a win for the audio, but there isn't really any notable tracks in the soundtrack that I thought were fantastic enough to give a listen to outside of the game itself. Gameplay then has to be amazing, right? Well, yes and no. There's a general jankiness to much of the gameplay and controls. Jessie suffers from herky-jerky tankiness sometimes. That disconnected rigidity of her movements that will have her turning in a way that feels entirely too abrupt and, well, video gamey. Even simple movements and turns feel like the type of deliberate woodenness of movement that belongs to a 70-year-old with a bad hip rather than a spry and healthy young woman who stands between the world of normalcy and peace and everything else that lurks at the edge of consciousness. And that's where Control starts to show its potential and worth. See, Control takes place in the oldest house, which is the ever-shifting, ever-changing halls that the Federal Bureau of Control houses their headquarters and base of operations. The Bureau is a branch of the government tasked with monitoring, identifying, and at times containing paranormal entities and events happening throughout America. A secret, hidden society that contends with all manners of abnormalities and reality-bending and breaking things in the world. The forces that go beyond the understanding of modern society and is explained away by happenstance and coincidence. Exploring the various paranormal items.
If I look away, it hurts me. Fuck?
Events. Persons.
To come for a visit. I helped you. You owe me now. And when time comes, I will come calling.
And powers lurking just beyond the veil of normalcy is the real strength of the game. These mysteries and revelations are drip-fed throughout the game, both in direct encounters and supplemental reading and logs, and is where the writing and lore of the game really shine, setting a mood and atmosphere that is both subtle and unsettling.
Questions recently regarding HRAs. Do you always need to wear them? What's the deal with the Hedron resonance anyway? Fuck. Despite what you may have heard, HRAs are not monitoring devices. We're not tracking your movements. or listening to your conversations while you're wearing them. We do that regardless whether or not you're wearing an HRA.
I wouldn't say that the game ever attains full horror game status, but it does encroach on that feeling of discovering secrets of the world not meant for your eyes quite effectively. The otherwise janky gameplay and too floaty gunplay has the saving grace of being coupled with some very handy and enjoyable to use unlockable powers. Ragdolling people around and hurling giant environmental objects into the unsuspected faces of your enemies feels great. Even better is using your powers to wreck nearly everything in the impressively destructible environment around you. Almost everything that isn't nailed down to a vital structure in the oldest house can be absolutely obliterated with gunfire, explosives, or various telekinetic powers. Tromping through office spaces and destroying every single shred of paper and faux wooden desks, smashing cafeterias, mangling little government cubicles reminds me keenly of the lobby scene from the original Matrix movie. How decimated the mundane and ultra-sanitized corporate building was, the satisfaction of the destruction, the complete zen of undoing something so hideously normal is the same in Control. As much as the powers make the gameplay, it's still the environment and atmosphere, the connections to the otherworldly, and the pacing that really makes Control special. Or at least it does at first, and also eventually. Control has a complicated intermingling of its greatest strengths and weaknesses, particularly from a storytelling, pacing, and game length perspective. Control starts out with a slow build, and I like that. I think the gradual submerging into the weird hidden world of paranormal events and the oldest house twisting, shifting world and the oddities and dangers it contains is actually a good thing. So much of what works about the lore and ambience of the game's world is how subtle it is, how many things are ordinary, while also being exceptionally strange if you just adjust for a slight shift in perspective to allow you a glimpse of the true nature hidden behind the everyday. This is great storytelling, great world building, and I think if Control had attempted to put all of its many secrets and mysteries on the table at once, it would have just been a jumbled, confusing, and ultimately uninteresting mess. In this regard, the pacing is very thoughtful and deliberate, and it hits marvelously. The problem is the overall runtime of the game, how much of it is padded, and how long it takes the pacing to finally pick up. Out of roughly 24 hours of game, 10 of that is optional side content. Although in all fairness, a decent bit of the content is excellent and worth playing. That leaves us with 13 or 14 hours of main story, and all but about the last 3 hours feels like it holds the same slow, plodding, piece-by-piece pace of the opening hours of the game. After the first 3 or 4 hours, the pacing begins to really drag, and I found myself skipping otherwise fairly interesting side content just because the game honestly felt like it was going relatively nowhere. This isn't to say that there was no plot or plot developments, there was. But ultimately it felt throughout as if I was being fed small morsels when I wanted a giant fulfilling meal. There were several points that I honestly considered just quitting the game, not because it was unplayable or without any merit at all, but just because it seemed so very samey, to the point that I began to lose nearly all sense of progression and build up in the game. And just as I began to feel that the game was just going to end up being an enjoyable but ultimately unfinished no for me, I entered the Astral Maze and, well...
Take control.
This is the Astral Maze, and it's here that I feel like the game finally, after so much hinting, suggesting, baiting, and coyly teasing, rips the band-aid off of the facade of our reality and shows us just how out of bounds the game really gets. Oh, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of paranormal and not right things before this point, but this is where you and Jesse really take the plunge into a full-on breakdown of time and space, where the astromaze bends and warps around you so rapidly that it approaches dizzying complexity, and we really experience what a wild ride the hidden world right behind our notice can be. To me, this is the key moment in the game, the real turning point of stepping off into the deep end of this world. This is the point where Control really takes off in terms of narrative, creativity, spectacle, and pacing of events. Where the game has been a plotting creep until now, we are suddenly catapulted face first through the ether with no breaks. The ride is wild with twists and turns in the remaining 3 or so hours of the game that I enjoyed so much, it really redeemed the game more than any other ending that I can think of. And I just wish it hadn't come so late. A deliverance, a redemption, held back until the very moment of me abandoning it all. I was a breath away from turning Control off for good, and if I had, I would have missed out on 3 hours that were better than the entirety of the rest of the game combined, with thrilling sequences, mind-blowing plot twists, fake-out ending.
Down, and there's nothing there. It's just the cell. And death. I was wrong. There was never anything there.
You are worn through time. The thunder song distorts you. Happiness comes. White pearls echo.
Hates gonna jack a plane. Don't push me.
There's the new girl, standing around daydreaming when she should be getting work done. And who the hell does she think she is? The director?
And a satisfyingly mentally trippy resolution. Control toys with its player in a very compelling way through its ending, and I almost missed every bit of it. Control is strongest in its beginning and end, and although the side content and tangential lore and storytelling are honestly great and worth your time, the pacing of the entire middle section of the game almost ruins it. And it's a major shame considering just how wowed I was by the final chapters. Control needs its first 3 hours or so of slow, simmering, drip-fed world building that really lays out a foundation of subtle, methodical, and nuanced differences between our perceived reality and the type of paranormal mysticism lurking just behind the gossamer thin fabric of Americana. But honestly, the game would benefit so much from cutting out the middle of the game, trimming it down to about 10 hours instead of 24. And once that 3-hour intro is over and the groundwork is laid, give us that last 3 hours of the game. Expand that pace and feel. The energy and wild reveals found there, and let that be our experience. A breakneck joyride through the alternate reality of interdimensional beings and entities we barely comprehend as we careen toward a spectacular crash finish. I'm glad that I stuck through the slump and pacing enough to get to the real gem of the game at its end. And I honestly do fully recommend people to try Control if they have even a bit of interest. The game has its flaws and shortcomings, but it does enough right to make playing the game worth it. And the ending really is a spectacular experience. I just wish the game had established its slow build and purposeful base before letting the veil slip much sooner so we could see the game for what it really is, and finally take control. Thanks for taking the time to check out my video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to leave a like and comment your thoughts on Control in the discussion covered here. Subscribe for more content if you enjoy my videos and would like to catch more exploration of gaming ideas and elements. Thanks for the support of my Patreons. I appreciate you guys. Until next time, stay salty, nerds, and walk in glory.
That was awesome.